Tonight with Andrew Marr.
It's 6:33. More than 5,000 people are now confirmed dead in Turkey and Syria after that terrible earthquake we reported on yesterday. More than 8,000 people have been recovered alive from the debris, and 380,000 people are sheltering in government refuges. Around the world, people are still trying to come to terms with the scale of what's happened, the brutal size of the shock. I'm joined now by Celal Şengör, a professor at Istanbul's Technical University's Department of Geology. Professor, thank you very much for joining us here on LBC. Can I ask you, first of all, to explain, because Turkey suffers quite a lot of earthquakes, why has this one been quite so catastrophic, quite so big?
Because it has happened in a place where, since 1714, such an earthquake had not happened. So there was a strain accumulation in that area, and it finally gave way. And it is very interesting, it was not one earthquake, but two earthquakes, because these earthquakes happened at two different faults near what we call a triple junction. Allow me to show that to you.
I can see the three lines and three different areas hitting each other.
You can perhaps read the East Anatolian Fault, the Elbistan Fault, which localized the 7.6, and many people thought that this fault here was responsible for the earthquake, and they say, well, this is the East Anatolian.
That was the Anatolian Fault. Yes,
fault.
We're getting deeply geological here, but
that the earthquake didn't take place here, but it took place there, which is a continuation, as you can read, along the Dead Sea.
Most people, because of the nature of radio, sadly can't see your drawing, but you're showing that it was a more complicated earthquake than has been described.
Yes.
Can I move on to ask you about? Can I move on to ask? I'm so sorry about the death toll, because we're told 5,000 people so far died.
Do we expect that to rise? People so far.
It's going to go so far.
More than 5,000, and I think it's going to go up.
You think it's going to go up and get worse than that? And so many buildings, Professor, have gone down. So many buildings. I think there's been reports of something like 8,000 major buildings falling. And given that this is an area which has suffered earthquakes before, I guess a lot of people's question will be simply, why? Why were more buildings not earthquake-proofed before?
Simply because people do not follow the guidelines that have been provided by the state. They say they have followed them, but there is not an efficient checking mechanism whether these guidelines have been followed. There was a lot of laxity, and people paid the price for it. Unfortunately, many of the buildings that collapsed are new buildings. Would have been easy to check whether they have been constructed according to the new guidelines that have been published in 2007.
Do you think that political corruption is part of this story?
Certainly. There's no question.
Right.
The political corruption in Turkey favors the contractors. And the state mechanism to check the quality of the buildings have been left to the contractors. A little bit similar to the situation in the UK recently.
You're thinking of the Grenfell Tower. The Grenfell Tower.
Yeah, I mean, if you leave it to the people who build the buildings and then ask them to check the quality of it, it defeats the purpose. You need an independent mechanism to check it. But even the independent mechanism would be perhaps a victim of corruption.
And staying with the politics, this is, of course, an area with a very large Kurdish population and opposition parties. And there have been reports that President Erdogan has not made contact with local mayors in cities that are run by the main opposition party, the CHP. Is that true?
That is true. And we've talked to two of them last night in the program of Mr. Altaylı, and that's what they said. In fact, they said they have made repeated appeals to the central government in Ankara for help, and they received essentially none.
Looking forward, there were a lot of aftershocks on the night after the first main shock hit. Do we expect more aftershocks, or could there be more?
Yes, the
or is this
aftershocks
more or
will
less
probably continue for about a year or so.
Really?
What's very interesting, there has been recorded more than 212 aftershocks greater than 4 in magnitude. Whereas in the whole last year of Turkey, only some 100 earthquakes greater than 4 in magnitude had been recorded throughout the country. So in this tiny area, you generated more than 212 magnitude 4 earthquakes.
And this is a large and very beautiful area. The destruction involves, we're told, around 11,000 reports of collapsed buildings and, of course, lots of ancient buildings as well. Just reflect for us on the job of reconstruction that now faces the Turkish government.
It's very interesting because the job of reconstruction will require a lot of money.
Yeah.
And how much, under the strained circumstances of the Turkish economy, will that be possible is for us to see in the future, in the near future. Because the obvious thing to do immediately, the winter conditions are pretty fierce there. The immediate thing to do is to provide cheap and quick shelter for these people that could be heated. And then one could worry about rebuilding the collapsed buildings, especially
after that.
Ancient one. Now, Mr. Marr, think of it when this magnitude earthquake will hit Istanbul, which it will.
That is an absolutely horrific thought, one of the most beautiful cities in the world and where you are now. Professor Şengör, thank you very much indeed for talking to me tonight. It's been much appreciated. Now, this has been